I'll save my introduction for last year. I want to focus on the smart folks that we have covering this next topic, which is around the manufacturing tech stack and looking at legacy systems and what's next in this space. So we'll do a quick round of introductions. Bill, let's start with you because we've got a Bill and a William, so I don't want to confuse things. So Bill, we're going to start with you. If you could introduce yourself and what you do, we'll dive in. Bill, you might be on mute.
How about now?
We gotcha.
Well, I guess what you missed there was I've got product management responsibilities for the security products at ARIA Cybersecurity, and we obviously believe that cybersecurity is an important part of the tech stack moving forward, and happy to be part of this discussion.
Excellent. And then William, let's jump to you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Chris. So yeah, by way of intro, my name is William Van Buskirk. I'm product manager for our marketplace on Tulip. So that's really thinking about, Tulip's a low-code, no-code platform. You can really make a variety of apps, analytics, automations. The marketplace serves to currently, connect users with templates, tools from third parties, from technology partners to really accelerate that journey. And then prior to Tulip, I did operations consulting for PwC.
Great to have you here as well, William. Jason, how about yourself?
Hello, everybody. My name is Jason Nassar. I work for Dell Technologies. I'm a product manager. I lead the manufacturing strategy, specifically for productized solutions that are being placed on our new platform, Native Edge, that's dedicated, to edge operations.
Excellent. And last but not least, a man that needs no introduction because he's been helping run the show all day long. Dave, how about yourself, for those that might just be joining right now?
Hi, Dave McMorrin, Director of Sales Engineering for Litmus, and been in the manufacturing automation space for over 25 years. So happy to be here. Thanks.
Welcome, everyone. And my name is Chris Lukey. I'm the host of a podcast called Manufacturing Happy Hour. And one of the reasons I'm particularly excited about this session is I'll frame it up in a really quick 1-minute story. Manufacturing Happy Hour is a podcast that's meant to distill some of the more complex topics in manufacturing the same way you'd talk to someone as if you're having a drink with someone. And it really started when I was a salesperson in the automation industry, trying to go beyond the buzzwords and figure out what technologies, what buzzwords really led to productivity on the plant floor, and going beyond starting with tech per se and understanding, hey, what tech makes sense for my operation, my facility, and beyond that, what integrations make sense? Those are a lot of the fundamental questions I was asking right at the start of beginning my podcast. So it's exciting today to have this conversation with people that have been there, done that, as we unpack the manufacturing tech stack. So we've got a number of questions. We're going to be going until about 1:55. So we got about 50 minutes for this conversation. So we can cover a lot of ground, but I know we're going to get some good answers from this group. So we're going to take as many questions as we can during this. So let's start with the first one. And William, I'm going to direct this one to you to kick us off. What's your take on the current tech stack in perhaps like siloed plants, and whether that's effectively serving plants or the enterprise as a whole? So, and like what hurdles need to be overcome to better prepare to doing more with data and competitiveness in the future?
Absolutely. No, that's a great question. I'd say the manufacturing tech stack, especially with data silos, experiencing what larger IT data systems encountered about 10 years ago, where on one hand, you had a very rigid, very structural element of data warehouses. Everything needs a table, everything needs a field, it's very clear. And then eventually they said, this isn't working. We can't use this for analytics. We can't use this for ML. We need a new paradigm. So then a lot of IT organizations launched data lakes, and those almost had no structure. They became a bit of a data swamp overnight. And I think we're seeing that same paradigm with a lot of organizations in manufacturing, where they're trying to hover between, are we going to use a very rigid, very pragmatic, hierarchical ISA 95 Purdue model, or are we going to move over to more of a unified namespace? And I think they're struggling to find that in-between ground where there's some flexibility, that they can connect silos, They can drive, enterprise-wide insights, move information from the shop floor to executives, while still maintaining some semblance of structure. So I think there's that back and forth that manufacturers are trying to achieve right now of we need some structure. We don't want to have a rigid ISA 95 forever, but we need some kind of structure. We can't have everything talk to everything with no sense of protocol or guidance or guardrails. To combat that, I think there's been a lot of realization that you can't just buy one tool and fix all your problems. There's been a lot of back and forth between, what middleware can we use to connect systems better and integrate them effectively.
Excellent way to kick us off. Jason, we're going to jump over to you next. Same questions for you. What are your thoughts on this topic?
I think we're all aware about the technology silos that exist on factory floors because they've been around forever, and they're all created in piecemeal by different leaders with different ambitions for optimization all throughout time. We're not going to get rid of that. We know that that's one of the number one problems that we have to solve. But I think beyond that, one of the things that we're seeing from a technology stack has to do with resources. There's really a lack of skilled resources when it comes to what is needed from the IT and OT together to actually make this work. And how are you actually going to manage and orchestrate this, but still be secure? William, mentioned the Purdue model, for example. Most of these plants are still operating in that exact same manner, but they need to be able to operate modern workloads on this factory floor. And they also need to be able to manage and orchestrate these modern workloads at scale, not in a siloed type fashion, in order to be successful. And I think that when it comes to technology stacks, this is one of the largest problems right here. Now, Dell is obviously working on this problem very closely. I mean, this is the reason why we have this native edge platform that we released just recently to try to solve this issue by providing zero trust at the end of the day. So you can issue out all of your hardware and deploy all the software that needs to be there, whether it's new software and hardware or whether it's new software or old software that's existing, and then, schedule all your updates in a very secure manner.
Jason, one thing that you said in that conversation or that answer that jumped out is how are you going to do this and still be secure? So I think that's a perfect segue over to Bill. I want to get your take on this question, and I know you have more of a cybersecurity perspective on this. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I do, and I'll focus on that cybersecurity perspective a little bit in my answer, because I think that is at the end of the day, a really important consideration. We are dealing with customers in various verticals, whether it be pharma, manufacturing, energy generation, that have implementations in place that aren't greenfield opportunities. Dave spoke to this in the end of the previous session, where OT lines have been stood up and are expected to be running for 30 years. So we're continuously finding customers that have equipment running legacy, unsupported, no longer in support operating systems. So how do you deal with that when you've got a mandate from people higher up to, I think Brent said it in a previous section, to connect it and collect it. The reality is connecting everything together in an OT environment can be dangerous if the appropriate steps aren't taken to secure that environment, whether they be zero trust steps that Jason referenced earlier, or other cybersecurity methods in place to protect those assets from infiltration, so you can take the advantage of the data that's being gathered and not lose all of the value of that data because there's been an incident that disrupted production, for instance. So cybersecurity, it's a big focus for us, and we think a focus necessary for the industry.
I look forward to having you as our voice of security throughout the rest of this conversation. I know that won't be the last time we come to you for that perspective. Dave, can you wrap this question up for us? And then we've got some other fun areas to move into after this one. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so thanks, Chris. So one of the couple of things that's jumped out were, William, you talked about the ISA 95, and it's been referred to a few times already. Some customers, some plants are regulated to maintain that. They have to follow that guideline. So even if they can see the benefits of a UNS or some other technologies, you still have to work with that. So I work with that all the time and coming up with technologies and ways to get the data up through that stack because it's required, right? You have to do that for security reasons. So great way to talk about that conversation. I also look at the stack from the standpoint of, traditionally it's been, we need something to collect, the protocols to get the data to expose that to maybe a SCADA or a historian system. And then I need to get that data out and up through all the levels. And, you can build that stack, the pieces exist, but then how do you then scale it and manage it? And we can refer to that at the last one. So that's kind of where I wanted to, explore that during this conversation as well. Is like, what do yeah, you can make it work, but then what's the next side, the next step after that?
So from
Thanks, Chris.
scaling to lessons learned from IT to security, great answers across the board to kick us off. I do have one follow-up question, and William, this one's for you because you mentioned something very early on that stuck out. And if you have a lesson to share from this, please do. But you mentioned IT was in this space like 10 years ago. They're kind of in the same spot we are now. So maybe one other thing to add to this, is there a critical lesson we can learn from what IT did to solve this problem that, hey, maybe it's not a one-to-one for, let's say, the operations or manufacturing space, but maybe it's more of a mindset that we need to be adopting. Do you have any final thoughts on that and something we can learn to make sure we don't repeat mistakes of the past?
Totally. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, no, I think just to recap some of those points I was making is very similar, right? A data warehouse is very rigid, very structural, similar to what we're dealing with for Purdue ISA 85 models. Important. Unified namespace, uncharted territory, MQTT. That can be a lot of what IT experience with, mismanaged data lakes. I think the lesson there is really focusing on the use case at hand. I think when some enterprises shifted all the way from data warehouse to data lake overnight, they didn't ask the question of what problem are we actually solving? Basic BI, basic reporting, probably fine for a data warehouse. Advanced ML, advanced, AI inferencing, probably need a data lake. So I think sometimes the mistake some IT organizations made was not asking that question of, and that was the previous panel, right? Use cases, not asking the question of what use case are we solving for, and how can we make sure this is fit for purpose? I think another thing that was a bit of an issue with IT is just because the industry at large has gone from database to data warehouse to data lake to data lake house, doesn't mean you need to jump on the bandwagon to the most recent iteration of that. Based on your use case, you may be fine with a 2 or 3 generation prior model if it fits your use case and keeps things simple.
So focus on the use case at hand. Great, very additional tangible takeaway there. We're going to do this like fantasy football snake draft style. So for this next question, we're going to start with Dave and we'll go in reverse order this time. So Dave, can you share examples of successful integration strategies for transitioning from legacy systems to modern manufacturing technologies and how these changes have improved overall operational efficiency in real world, real life manufacturing settings?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. So I think one of the parts, and this is alluded to before, and it ties in with security in the Purdue model and legacy equipment, is getting something closer to the device, as close to the device as you can get, to then modernize it. So convert it from, a PLC 5, kind of thing that's been, out of existence for 20 years, pulling data out of that close to the space and then converting it to something more modern, like an MQTT or some other format, and just be able to get that data up through that ISA 95 stack and do that securely, through all the firewalls and, making sure data can't get back down or people can't penetrate and that architecture. So I think that's part of it, is just getting to that data and getting it converted sooner in that tech stack. Right, so at more closer to the source, I guess I would say. So that's what we've seen, and being able to convert that data and using different message brokers. Again, not trying to tout any one over the other. There's plenty of the different techs that are out there technologies that are out there, but getting it up through that ISA 95 architecture and through all the firewalls in the, encrypted, secure way, that IT can control and be comfortable with as well. And so we're doing that all the time. Right? We deal with a lot of chemical companies and that are mandated to follow the ISA 95 architecture, and we're able to fit in with that quite well. But that's my philosophy on it.
No, I like it. Thank you, Dave, for starting us off on that foot. And I think your answer probably provides a nice segue to Bill as well. Same question for you, Bill. What are your thoughts on transitioning from legacy systems and, for your, like, how to do it securely as well?
Yeah, exactly. And so obviously there's the step of upgrading a line from legacy equipment to a more modern infrastructure, for instance. However, what we've seen in reality is organizations that have a number of lines that are running that have the requirement to continue running. So maybe we can do this incrementally. We're not going to be able to do a forklift upgrade of a particular process or line. So we ended up providing solutions that allow existing implementations to continue to operate securely. Our cybersecurity solutions can be deployed into existing infrastructure that is running on legacy in a legacy environment, while simultaneously running on upgraded versions of the line. So it's an incremental approach. We feel that the approach there needs to be an incremental approach availability that maintains cybersecurity for existing implementations, existing environments, existing lines, while the upgrade's in process. And just a quick aside on IIoT sort of convergence. We touched on it a little in the first conversation. I think one of the things we need to be careful about as we are migrating to a more connected world to access that data to help us operationalize that information to increase efficiencies is to make sure that we're not haphazardly adopting best practices from the IT environment into the OT environment, because they're not necessarily the same animal. We can get into some discussion into details on that later, but current best practices of patching keeping your applications patched at all times doesn't necessarily translate into the OT environment. So IT-OT convergence is an important aspect of adoption of some of the modern capabilities of Industry 4.0. But we have to be careful about what we're bringing into the OT environment from that space, my perspective.
Excellent. Jason, we're going to move to you next on this, and then we'll wrap this one up with William.
Yeah, so you mentioned real world examples, so I'll try to start with that. And I first want to address what Bill, you just said. You can't implement IT practices haphazardly, and this example is exactly it. So at Dell, we've hired a bunch of OT experts to integrate with our IT experts very specifically to create solutions ahead of time with our partners. And actually, Litmus is a big partner, and we've done this with them as well. But what that does is it allows us to create architectures based on outcomes for our customers with the software to optimize, and then we create sizing for that, small, medium, and large, depending on how much data you're actually taking in and what the use case is, and we optimize for that, trying to minimize really that proof of concept time for our customers, get 80% of the way there. That's proven valuable. We have a brewery, a beer factory that's out in the Boston area where we've actually implemented one of these solutions. And so, when you're dealing with beer very specifically, it's very specific and it's touchy at the end of the day to get that very consistent flavor, And so this brewery specifically had very manual operations at the end of the day. So you have people that are literally looking at the pressures and the temperatures of the vats, and there was no digitization. So what Dell helped this company do, first off, was add all of those sensors and gauges from a digital perspective so that they could actually look at this from an IoT world and see it and control it virtually. And then we also created an architecture based off of our validated designs that enabled them to scale in the future and apply it to future breweries that are going to be out there, as well as a plan for continuation out into the future. And so at the end of the day, what that did was introduce new technology. It's improving their quality. They're saving money every day. And they were at the point where they had staff basically 24/7 staring at whether or not these beer vats were doing what they're supposed to do. They don't have to do that anymore because they have a virtual view of what's going on.
Excellent answer. Excellent real world example. Coincidentally, I live in Milwaukee, but I'm traveling for work this week in Boston. So I wouldn't be surprised if I've had some of that technology driven beer sometime during my stay here so far. William, what would you add to this one to wrap this up?
Yeah, I can give two quick anecdotes. I'll talk a little bit about kind of the need to figure out what needs to be big bang versus what can be piloted, and I'll talk about a kind of fit for purpose use case. I think the crux of this question, correct if I'm wrong, is really going from legacy to modern systems. What do you need to consider? And I think a big thing, at least within Tulip, is what can you do on a single line with a single person, with a single operator, versus what requires buy-in and implementation of the entire site. So a prime example of that would be, using a new scheduling system or a new QMS or a new ERP. That's kind of all or nothing. We got to have everyone using the same tool. If we got to figure the inventory, that's a source of truth. There are other tools where it's like, hey, we just want to know real-time operator visibility. One of my favorite apps I made for the Tulip library, our marketplace, is a really simple app. Just put in, operator punches in, hey, machine's on, machine's off, I'm on lunch, I'm on break. That's it. You can get insights with one operator. You don't need all the operators to use an app like that. So we've been trying to clarify the balance of what can you do piecemeal versus what really requires buy-in and kind of measure twice cut once situations from going from legacy to modern. I'll also say there's a lot of hacky ways to get data to really drive the decision to go to modern. I was in consulting. We had a customer who wanted to connect all their PLCs and stream all their machine data. They had a huge bank of mills. And we kind of took a step back, and admittedly, it was a bit of a crazy situation, but I said, why can't we just put some vibration sensors on these machines and just kind of give some rough insights? So put some vibration sensors on some machines and basically found out, hey, half of them aren't running much of the time at all. You have way too many machines. Let's think about capacity planning. Let's think about asset planning. There's probably a much bigger opportunity here before we go into connecting all of your PLCs. So a lot of it is taking a step back, trying to find a little bit of data or a little bit of a POC to drive that thinking before you make the big leap. So those would be two quick examples, quick anecdotes.
Yeah, I love that story about taking that step back, getting more data. I think at a Do More with Data Summit, that's a perfect example to really get to the root cause of and what you actually need to do next versus what you might think you need to do next, allowing the data to drive the decisions like you just said. This next one is, Jason, we're going to start with you on this one. We're going to change up the order this time. So my question is, how are SCADA historians and MES systems limiting today's manufacturers in terms of being, let's say, pushed beyond the limits of what they're ideally suited to do? And what additional considerations should be taken into account?
So it's not with all of the systems, but most of them, to be honest with you, are developed in a silo themselves. A lot of times it's one of these large OT companies that has the stack all the way up and down, and sometimes there's connection issues with everything else that's going on. So that's one of the biggest challenges. But I would say in the future moving forward, and we're all looking at this, it's all about artificial intelligence at the end of the day. You have all these historians, you have all this data that's being collected, but with the release of ChatGPT, the entire world right now understands what is happening with natural language processing and generative AI. What needs to happen next, and I think that it's going to take a lot of consideration from a security perspective, Bill, but what needs to happen next is we need to be applying this to this ambiguous data, this siloed data that's happening all throughout the factory floor, taking it that next step further, collecting that data and actually having the machines tell you what you're missing. And we're already there. The technology's there. It's just a matter of who's going to be implementing it first and what companies are brave enough to take that extra step to reap the benefits of what's going on.
William, I'm going to jump to you next on this, and then we'll jump down to Bill after this, because I think with your work that you do with Tulip, I feel like you're really on the cutting edge of some of this stuff when it comes to, understanding what these traditional systems, what their limitations are, but finding ways to go beyond that with, let's say, new systems and platforms.
That's like, are we talking about new systems broadly, or just historians, or is there an element of systems you want to double down on?
I would say, is there a direction you want to go in particular, or do you have two different answers?
Okay, I'll take a broad, and then I'll go specific.
Okay.
I think I think there's this really big balance that a lot of U.S. manufacturers are seeing, that it's not enough to just connect all of your PLCs and try to understand what's your uptime, what's your OEE. That can help. No, by no means. I mean, that can definitely help. But I think at Tulip, we've seen that there's a lot of hidden insights, hidden frustrations, hidden opportunities with really integrating and augmenting the operator experience. So it's not just enough to say, let's connect everything that's spitting out ones and zeros and call it a day and say, hey, we have great data. Hey, we have a new system architecture. This is great. There's a lot of insights, going on from the operators. And the more we can streamline that experience, give a new experience, connect operators to tools they need. I mean, I'm always surprised and sometimes afraid. Bill can probably speak to that, of just how many shadow Excel tools there are. There was a time I was consulting, and I was like, I got to ask you guys, why do you call it the Jim tool? Oh, well, this guy named Jim, he made this Excel tracker about 10 years ago. He left the company, but that's how we track everything. We kind of just pass it back and forth. And it's like, does IT know about this? Oh, not really. We never got around to fixing it. So that happens time and time again. So I think that the big thing I want to emphasize from, work at Tulip is like, don't sleep on the idea of augmenting, enabling operators in different ways to kind of get them closer to the tech, closer to the operations. You'd be surprised how many times there's a paper trail of someone writing something down, which goes to an email, which goes somewhere else, which finally goes to your ERP. And I'm always, that's an opportunity. That's an opportunity to really streamline things and make sure data is not getting lost. So I say that's just a core foundational emphasis I'd like to make, of just making sure it's not a pure like machine integration transformation story, but it's really thinking about operations holistically across people, material, labor, flow, machines, etc.
I like that final lesson on taking the holistic perspective. And since you've introduced Jim tools to the conversation, I think it's a perfect time to get Bill's take on this question.
Yeah, so I haven't got too many Bill tools to bring to bear on the problem, but the problem, getting back to, are we taking advantage of the existing infrastructure to the max to gain the most benefit from the insights that it can provide? I think Jason hit the nail on the head with regards to more advanced analysis that needs to be brought to bear on the information that can be provided by the existing infrastructure, by the existing tools. Are they overtaxed beyond what they were originally designed for? Well, if you're expecting them to automatically create some insights that are actionable, yeah, probably. But if we can take that and move that analysis up and still gain all of the visibility that we can from the existing stack, I think that's a move in the right direction. Now, that being said, when we're looking at solutions they may be siloed solutions from particular manufacturers with regards to the infrastructure that we're talking about here, there's still a requirement to protect that infrastructure. And I know I keep going back to protecting it because that's what we really think is important. Because the last thing you want to have happen is some of this infrastructure, whether it be a PLC or a historian, get attacked or breached. Because again, you want to make sure that your attack surface is as small as possible. So it's important to make sure that even existing infrastructure is protected for what it's worth.
And Dave, you've been back clean up for us, so we'll wrap with you, and then we'll start the next question with you as well.
Yeah.
Lead off this time.
Yeah, I want to address something William had talked about, which was the spreadsheet tracking, and Mark referred to it in a previous session with what we call the shadow IT, which is these applications that are built all the time. And I think companies try to go and buy systems that one-piece solution to solve all of that, but you never find it. You can build a world-class MES, but people are still going to build their own applications for their needs because it's either too difficult, too expensive, whatever, to change the MES. So they're going to build their own thing. So I look at it as like, don't try to stop that. Just embrace it. Just embrace it in a secure way. So give people tools like Tulip to go and be able to build their own application, build their own analytics for them, and make it easy for them to do that. So it's not a stop doing it. It's more of a give somebody, enable them, but to you, Bill, like do it securely so you're not opening up, some port to your home office to try to get data out of it. And regarding SCADA and MES and historian systems, the traditional systems we've been working with for 30 plus years, yeah, they can be limited on it. They sell their space. SCADA is not going anywhere anytime soon. Historians, some companies are still regulated to have historical data, historian data, but the newer tools can then take that historical data that is very basic, tag name, value, timestamp, start adding context, start building digital twins with it, data modeling of it, and implementing all these newer tools out there. So leaving that in place is fine. It just understand their limitations and then have a flexible platform that can start bringing that data in and actually start doing some of the newer things that we can do with the data. Again, Jason, for instance, ChatGPT and other machine and AI stuff out there. So, those systems aren't going anywhere anytime soon, but I just look at the SCADA is another data source for me. Historian's another data source to me. So, they have their places, and like I said, I don't think they're going to go anywhere soon.
All right, so we're about halfway through our session right now. Looks like we are going to get a chance to get to all the questions we want to ask this crew. So I made the promise to you, Dave. Next question's for you to lead us off. So for manufacturers looking to get started quickly with the latest tech stack, what's the recipe you'd recommend? Like, what are the essential steps or best practices to ensure a smooth transition and minimize disruption to ongoing operations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think part of it is actually, I like to start with the use case, and we kind of talked about that in this session and others, and working your way backwards, right? What do you need to, what data do I need to get to? So what are you really trying to solve, and working backwards to where is that data? Because that will tell you, where's the solution going to live? Is it cloud or is it on-prem? Is it going to, what level of your ISA 95 is it going to live in? Where is that data coming from? What firewall rules need to be changed or added? Is the data encrypted? What are the vulnerabilities? So those kinds of things. So I think starting with your use case and working backwards is a good way to do that. Other best practices are, once you figure out what your solution is and what you're trying to do and where the data is, bring IT in sooner rather than later, because they're going to start, telling you, yeah, you can open this firewall. No, you're going to have to architect it differently, those kinds of things. So I think bringing them in to this conversation earlier rather than later is better. So planning out what you want to do, getting the right teams involved with it. Who are the stakeholders in the solution? Is it operators? Is it the business side? Is it, is it IT? Those kinds of things. So I think that's really the best practice. We have some processes that we use internally to go through and get that single source of truth for the project itself, and everybody has access to that information. So things like that, I think, are the best practice. Mark would probably be better at answering that than I am, but that's my point of view on it.
No, I thought those were really good, tangible points. I feel like we're doubling down on starting with the use case, and then I like the human-centered advice of getting the IT department involved sooner than rather than later, rather than getting into a finger-pointing match at any point later or early down the line. So great way to kick us off. Jason, can you continue down the track on this one?
Yeah, so historically, one of the biggest problems that I've seen is these proof of concepts that are generally started with smaller groups within an organization trying to prove the new technology that they're implementing for digital transformation. Usually those things end up in a dead end or this proof of concept purgatory where it never ends. I'd say don't start from scratch. Use cases, absolutely, Dave, you're spot on. But at the end of the day, this is what we're trying to solve at Dell by creating validated designs. These are literal, it's not just consulting that you're used to. It's not high level discussion. It's high level all the way down to the lowest level. It's instruction manuals that tell you each step based on the size of your factory, the amount of data you're going to collect, the outcomes you're trying to achieve, the exact configurations and architectures you should leverage. And that's really how you implement this very quickly. And since it's been validated by technical experts at the end of the day, for the most part, it's going to work quite well rather than starting from scratch. And that's what's key. That's what you need to do.
Bill, let's jump down to you on this.
Sure, and I think there may be a couple of different approaches to this, depending on where you're coming into adopting some of the data transformation initiatives. I mean, if you're a new manufacturer looking to stand up a facility, it's really important to go through those steps. Well, I think it's important for both scenarios to go through the steps of defining the use case, defining the outcomes that you consider outcomes that will be leading to success. But if you're looking to start transforming an existing environment, maybe you want to be taking a look at a strategy that will allow you to start bringing pieces in incrementally or upgrading that will allow you to adopt some of these new capabilities without disruption, that don't require anything as mundane as the rebooting of a line to keep continuing operation while you're bringing in new capabilities. So I think there's a couple of paths you need to look at with regards to embracing the new technologies, whether it's greenfield, starting from scratch, or perhaps incrementally upgrading existing capabilities.
Excellent. And then William, you're the last one for this round of questioning.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'll round us off. Now we've covered a lot of ground already. I really appreciate what Dave, Jason, and Bill have said about really, making sure you're bringing IT in early, making sure you're thinking about the use case, making sure there's this, balance of IT, OT, making sure you're thinking about value. I'll stress a few additional topics, and one will be that just further emphasize that value topic. I think a big area we've seen is not just saying where is the value, but trying to define what is the value. Really I love asking customers that are you trying to reduce cost, improve revenue, improve scheduling flexibility, reduce regulatory issues and concerns. And I think when you frame it like that, you go from an ambiguous, we need to bump up operational efficiency conversations to a much more tactical, strategic, like, here's what we want to do and why, which then paves the way for the rest of the conversation. I think that's been a big thing we've seen. I think a big thing at Tulip we've seen for adoption is there are situations you're walking into a plant, all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed with your iPad and your Tulip apps that you just download. You're all excited. I'm walking into a trust deficit environment. I'm maybe walking into a plant that's like, all right, another one of these people. We've seen this, hasn't worked. IT shut it down. We don't like it. Takes forever. So you may be walking into a trust deficit situation, and the best way to combat those is to really work bottoms up, engage operators, engage the team early, engage supervisors. There's times where I found the most buy-in is I stay late, I'm hanging out with the second shift crew, and I'm getting their buy-in. But the biggest thing is throwing a W on the board as soon as you can. So there were times where we would have the simplest dashboards. We would put it on a TV in the factory, and the plant manager walked out and said, "Oh, that's a dashboard, and it works, and I see the data, and I trust it." may not have solved all of his problems, but he has some trust now. We've addressed that trust deficit situation. I think the third thing, sure, go ahead.
Sorry, my mistake.
Oh, you're fine. I said the third thing I mentioned is just the builders are always going to build. Dave mentioned, hey, you take away this or that, they're going to find something else. You take away their Excel tools, they're going to use paper. It's inevitable. So you can either try to squash their creativity and tell them, no, we hired you to, I think Jason was your example of, or Dave, I can't remember about the beer. We hired you to watch the vat for 24 hours a day. You can either do that, or you can say, hey, we want to leverage your creativity, but we want to do it in a safe way. How can we do that? And you can collaborate, work with those citizen developers.
Yeah, it's I'm looking at the chat as well. There's a comment that came in here was there was one that said, hey, we could talk about brew better beer with data as a specific use case for what we're talking about. But we did have a question come in, and this is if anyone wants to signal me early by raising their hand if they're feeling good about this one. I want to address this because oftentimes I feel like we rush through the questions that have come in, and I want to make sure we get to the audience. So Paul asked, can well-managed metadata plus tagging on records coming from hybrid sets of machines simplify creating more personal tools for operators, engineers? I'm curious, does anyone here have a thought of this? Feel free to raise your hand. Or we can think about this and then come back to it if you need a moment to think through this. Okay, Dave, what do you got on that one?
I actually put a little message in the chat already, but to
perfect.
talk about that, I find that when you start talking about adding contextualized data, say something just simple like a work order. If you add that to the payload of the data when it lands, right, that means now all of a sudden I can go look at my PLC data and know and reference the work order by just doing a simple query to get to that data. And now I have what happened with my, my PLC or whatever other equipment you're looking at for that work order, right? It makes it very simple for someone to go get to that data and i.e. democratize that data. So by adding that context, and you can create whatever structure you want, it really depends on, I don't think there's one holy grail of contextualized data or a data model. It's what works for you. I've seen all sorts of different types. But the idea is that if you add that data to it, you can then, by adding that context, you can then get that data more personalized to the user. So if somebody like a plant manager wants to go look at something like a shift data, or how did my equipment run on this particular shift, they can go take that information and say, hey, shift 3 needs a little more training in this area because they now have the data, but making it easy for them to do that. So they're not having to go to the traditional way of go to my ERP or my MES and get the information for this work order, then go to my historian and go query the data for this time to this time because that's when it ran, and then put it all together in a spreadsheet and finally get to the point where you can write a graph on it. If you land the data with the context in it, it just makes that use case so much faster and easier to implement. And if you think ahead about what those use cases are, who's using the data, adding that context makes it actually much easier to implement those use cases.
Thank you for stepping in on that one, Dave. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that one before we move on to the next question? I don't want to intercept anyone that wanted to bring something up.
I go back to, I think AI is going to be solving these problems really soon. And the quicker that companies adopt methodology that revolves around that, the more, something as complex as metadata integrating with actual OT data that's on a factory floor is going to make a lot more sense and be less cumbersome.
Excellent point.
A quick thing is I think right now industrial data ops is still, a bit of a buzzword, but I think it's going to become much more of a reality, especially when I know no factory that I know of at least has only DMG Mori or only Moriseki machines or only KUKA automations. It's a mixed bag at times. So contextualization is vital. And to Jason's point, we're going to see a situation where we're moving from data engineers and data analysts trying to put in the right context, put in the right, MQTT payloads correctly, to now it's they're narratively saying, hey, I would like to do X, Y, and Z to accomplish A, B, and C. And they're thinking about it more about it as a narrative.
Yeah.
One question I have, which we've talked to this next question a couple times throughout this conversation around cybersecurity, but I think it's worth addressing cybersecurity head on. So naturally, Bill, you're going to lead us off on this one. Can you elaborate on the key cybersecurity challenges and solutions in the manufacturing technology stack, especially when dealing with a mix of old and new systems? Again, this is probably going to revisit some topics, but let's just take it from a straight security standpoint.
Sure, absolutely. So I think I touched on it earlier. You mentioned that, Chris, with regards to legacy versus current day implementations of technologies within the stack. We bump into this all the time. We bump into organizations that might have 20% or more of their existing infrastructure that's running on maybe a legacy operating system. Going back to Windows XP, it's still out there. It's still a big part of the production capability that is in place today. And because of that, some of the more modern approaches to cybersecurity aren't even available. You couldn't deploy an endpoint security solution to some of these legacy platforms. Well, we felt that was important and an important gap. And, we obviously, shameless commercial here, we've obviously to the stack that allow protection, not just detection, but protection back into that legacy environment. Products that I think have the attributes that I consider important, that we consider important for deployment, deploy easily at scale without interruption of existing production facilities, production lines, no reboots necessary. I know that's a pedantic sort of statement, but it's important for operators that are looking at productivity in the many thousands of dollars per minute in some of their production facilities. So that's important. The ability to protect that legacy infrastructure as well as all of the current modern infrastructure is incredibly important and can't be forgotten. I touched on IT best practices versus OT best practices. There are IT best practices today that utilize a philosophy of patching. Make sure all of your applications and your OSs are running the current patches. You can't necessarily do that in an OT environment. So you need a solution in place, a cybersecurity solution in place that will protect those assets, even if they're unprotected or there's unknown vulnerabilities in the applications running on them. So that's a gap. That's a gap we're trying to fill, and I think it's a gap that needs to be filled for secure operation in OT environment.
Appreciate you putting the wrapper around that. We're at about the 7-minute mark here. Let's go William, Jason, and Dave. William, any other quick things you'd add to this one?
Yeah, I'd say, you can, a lot of these, such as our SaaS tool, we offer on a variety of cloud hosting platforms, including GovCloud, which obviously bolsters cybersecurity issues if you're working with sensitive data. But at the end of the day, no matter the security standards of our own software or security standards of anyone, security at its heart is up to the people on the front lines. I'll mention one example of this. We have an integration with NIMI. There are these bands operators and supervisors can wear so that instead of having to log into a workstation, you walk up to your workstation, scans the band, logs you in, you walk away, automatically logs you out. So thinking about those elements, that's not really a concern in IT, right? You go to your desk, you log into your computer, you go away, you hit Windows L, you log out. They're not thinking about that. So bringing cybersecurity into an OT landscape, you're going to have to encounter different ideas like that. So our making it as intuitive as possible for the front line is critical.
Jason, how about yourself?
Yeah, so we talked about ISA 95 a couple of times, and honestly, it is an old, outdated architecture, and things have changed, right? This is the biggest perpetrator right here. Everybody has cell phones. They're walking on factory floors with these things in their pockets, just waiting to invade everything that's going on there. We have solutions that are out there right now with some of our partners that are pretty amazing because they can sniff that entire Purdue model network. And it's very surprising when it tells you exactly where you're wrong. It shows you the different levels and how they're invading each other. That technology didn't exist not too long ago, and it's really still at its infancy, but it's out there, and it's helping customers right now, and that's the kind of stuff that needs to be implemented. Cybersecurity solutions that solve OT protocols as well as all the IT related cybersecurity issues that you'd expect.
And then Dave, what would you add?
Well, again, talking about security, again, like I said, it's definitely important, and needing to bring IT in earlier to handle that path of that flow of the data to who needs it is really critical. And doing it sooner rather than later is helpful. And that's one of the things I like about doing a proof of concept is you actually start to vet out some of those things in a proof of concept. So don't do the proof of concept silo. Do a proof of concept like you're really going to do it. That actually shakes out all the issues you're going to have, not just in the first plant, but in all the plants. You're going to start to see, what you need to do during those things. So definitely need to have security in mind. Like I said, it's best practice bringing that in earlier rather than later.
All right. Looks like Mark is joining us again, which is good because we're coming to the end, and we had another question come into the chat. So I'd like to pose this one to the group as well. And any takers here, feel free to raise your hand to jump in on this one. The question from Kevin is, machine learning isn't magic, and sometimes the data landscape just doesn't support the target use case. How do you encourage customers to experiment with machine learning in various use cases rather than leading with like a guaranteed ML driven solution? Jason?
I think that you prove through validated design use cases. You say, hey, look, this is a validated design. We've gone through these exercises. This is our proof. These are the dashboards showing the improvement. Start somewhere here. We've gotten you a little bit closer. You can experiment, but use this as your foundation.
All right.
Back on one more element too. I think a big thing is the output may not be a model. The output may not be real-time inferencing. There's a number of times where at Tulip we've brought in data from the shop floor. We've built a regression, built a classification, not to actually run that in real time, but just to say, well, here are your most important features. To then say, hey, we've used ML once, but the biggest insight is that these three or four characteristics of your recipe parameters, or these matter the most. That's the insight. Done. We don't need to run ML algorithms in real time. We just need to give you that baseline insight of these parameters matter, these parameters don't matter as much. That's a really basic insight that we can drop in without having to actually run the models in real time.
Yeah. That's really your first step, is doing that.
Excellent. Well, we're coming here at the end. I appreciate all the ground all of you have covered today. I heard use cases coming up quite a bit. Good holistic way that we worked security into every part of our conversation. And then the human elements are always things that stick out to me as a podcaster, whether it's, hey, do you really want to watch that batch of beer all day, or do you want to be doing something else? Hey, do we want to point fingers at the IT department and blame one another down the line, or should we get everyone involved earlier and get these conversations happening earlier as well? So as we wrap up here, I just want to say, Bill, Dave, Jason, William, thank you for sharing all your insights with us. And thank you to everyone for sticking with us here to the end of the day. We've got a recap coming up here at the end. So stick with us as we go through some of the highlights from day one of the Do More with Data Summit.
Thanks, Chris.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. All right, Dave. We'll know we got Mark coming back in here at the end here in a second.